The Smiling Man. It was the summer of 2003, and I had just moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere. My parents thought the fresh air and quiet surroundings would be good for me. I was 13, and the thought of leaving my friends and the city behind filled me with dread. Our new house was an old Victorian, complete with creaky floorboards and a sense of history that seemed almost palpable. The first few days were uneventful, just the usual unpacking and getting to know the new place. But things started to get weird one night when I was up late, playing video games. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from outside my window. At first I thought it was just the branches of the old oak tree scraping against the glass. But when I looked, there were no branches near my window. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pulled back the curtain. Standing in the faint moonlight was a man. He was tall and thin, with a face that seemed to be frozen in a wide, unnatural grin. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they seemed to pierce right through me. I quickly shut the curtain and turned off the lights, hoping he hadn't seen me. My heart was pounding, and I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. After all, who would be standing outside at this hour? The next morning, I told my parents about the man, but they brushed it off as a bad dream. I wanted to believe them, but I knew what I saw. Over the next few nights, the tapping continued, always at the same time, and always the same man with that horrifying smile. One night I decided to stay up and see if I could catch him on camera. I set up my old camcorder facing the window and waited. Just after 2 a.m., the tapping began. I hit record and slowly peeked out from behind the curtain. There he was, closer this time, his face almost pressed against the glass. His grin seemed even wider, and his eyes were filled with a malevolent gleam. I froze in terror, unable to move or look away. Suddenly he raised a hand and waved slowly, as if mocking my fear. I stumbled back, tripping over my chair and making a loud noise. By the time I scrambled to my feet and looked out the window again, he was gone. The next morning I reviewed the footage. My heart sank when I saw that the camera had glitched right at the moment he appeared, leaving nothing but static. Desperate, I decided to ask the neighbors if they knew anything about the man. Most of them just gave me puzzled looks, but one old woman seemed to understand. She told me about the previous owner of our house, a man who had gone mad after losing his family in a tragic accident. He was known for his unsettling smile and had been found dead in the very room I now slept in. According to the woman, he had been buried in the local cemetery, but his restless spirit was said to wander the town, seeking something he had lost. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt a cold presence in the room, and the tapping began again, louder this time. I mustered all my courage and confronted the window. "What do you want?" I shouted. The man's grin seemed to widen impossibly, and then he spoke. His voice was a whisper, but it echoed in my mind. "I'm here for you." I slammed the window shut and ran to my parents' room, but when we returned, the man was gone. The tapping never stopped, though. Every night, just after 2 a.m., I would hear it. My parents never heard it, but I knew he was there, waiting. We moved away after a year, and I thought I had left the smiling man behind. But sometimes in the dead of night, I still hear that soft tapping, and I know he's still out there searching. Remember to always close your curtains at night. You never know who might be watching. The abandoned game store. It was the summer of 2002, and I was spending most of my days at home, glued to my PlayStation 2. One afternoon, my friend Mike called me, excited about a rumor he had heard. There was an old abandoned game store on the outskirts of town that was said to have rare, forgotten games left behind. Naturally, we decided to check it out. The store was a relic from the past, its sign barely legible under the layers of grime and ivy that had overtaken it. The windows were boarded up, but the door was surprisingly easy to open. As we stepped inside, the musty smell of decay hit us, and dust swirled in the faint beams of light that penetrated the darkness. We navigated through the aisles, flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. Shelves were filled with old game cartridges and discs, some dating back to the 80s and 90s. It was a treasure trove for any gamer. As we rummaged through the piles, Mike stumbled upon an unmarked game disc in a cracked jewel case. The disc was blank except for the word "Void" scratched onto its surface with what looked like a knife. Intrigued, we decided to take it back to my place and see if it still worked. We inserted the disc into my PS2, and after a brief moment of static, a crude menu appeared. The game was simply titled Void. There was no developer logo or any indication of its origin. The only option was Start. We selected it, and the screen went black before fading into a 3D rendered forest at night. The graphics were unsettlingly realistic for the time, and there was an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. We controlled a character who seemed lost in the forest, armed only with a flickering flashlight. As we navigated through the dense trees, strange symbols began to appear on the screen, and whispers in a language we couldn't understand filled the room. The further we went, the more disturbing the game became. Suddenly the screen glitched and a horrifying figure flashed before us, a grotesque, shadowy entity with glowing red eyes. Our character was frozen in place, unable to move as the entity drew closer. The whispers grew louder, now sounding like desperate pleas for help. The entity reached out, and the screen went black again. We tried to exit the game, but the console wouldn't respond. The whispers persisted, growing more frantic. Just as we were about to unplug the PS2, the screen lit up with a final message. "You are not alone." We yanked the power cord, and the room fell silent. Mike and I were shaken, but we laughed it off, attributing it to a clever hack by some game designer. However, that night, I had the worst nightmares of my life. Dark figures haunted my dreams, whispering in that same incomprehensible language. The next day Mike called, his voice trembling. He said he had seen the shadowy figure from the game standing at the foot of his bed. I brushed it off as paranoia. But the following night, I saw it too. It was just a shadow in the corner of my room, but its red eyes pierced the darkness. We tried to destroy the disc, but no matter what we did, scratching it, breaking it in half, burning it, it remained intact. Desperate, we returned to the abandoned store, hoping to find answers. To our horror, the store was completely empty, as if it had never existed. Mike and I stopped talking about the game, hoping to forget the whole ordeal. But every now and then I hear those whispers, and I feel the presence of something watching me from the shadows. Whatever we unleashed from that disc, it followed us, and it's still out there, waiting. The midnight game. Do you ever wake up at exactly midnight? There's something eerie about that time, isn't there? It's as if the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. If you ever find yourself awake at midnight, there's a game you can play. But I must warn you, this game is not for the faint of heart. First, make sure you're alone. Turn off all the lights in your house. Light a single candle and place it in front of a mirror. The mirror is important. It's a window to another world. Sit in front of the mirror with the candle between you and your reflection. Close your eyes and clear your mind. Now repeat these words 3 times. I invite you in. Open your eyes and look into the mirror. At first, you'll see nothing but your own reflection. But soon, you'll notice something strange. The shadows in the room will begin to move, and your reflection will start to change. It will smile at you, even if you're not smiling. It will move its lips, but you won't hear any sound. Whatever you do, don't break eye contact. If you look away, even for a second, the game is over, and you'll lose. If you win, your reflection will eventually stop moving. The shadows will return to normal. Blow out the candle, turn on the lights, and go to bed. But if you lose, well, let's just say you won't be alone anymore. You'll feel a presence in the room with you, watching you, following you. You'll never see it, but you'll know it's there. And every night, at exactly midnight, you'll wake up. You'll see its eyes staring at you from the darkness. So, if you're ever awake at midnight and you feel brave enough, give the midnight game a try. Just be sure you're prepared for the consequences, because once you invite something in, it's not so easy to make it leave.